We'll go ahead and start. Okay, welcome everybody. We're taking on Genesis, and this is some tricky stuff we're going to do today. Because today we're heading into the really, really iconic chapters 3 and 4. So let me go ahead and share our slides here. Okay. So last week we did some context. We talked about why this was written down, who it was written down for. And this week we're working on chapters 3 and 4, Adam and Eve and the kids. After Thanksgiving, we're going to take on the Great Flood. So 5 and 7 next week, and then Noah's Covenant, and then the final 2. So again, we're dividing Genesis into kind of the universal components, which is 1 through 11, and then 12 through the end of Genesis, which is the story of the patriarchs. So the second part, which will start in March, is going to be Abraham and his kids' story. Okay, now before we go into this one, this is the iconic big passage. Okay, so I want to again stress close reading. It's really, really critical that we only read what's on the page and not what we think is on the page. Okay, so much has been layered onto this particular passage that isn't there. I want you to really focus on close reading what's on the page. So someone want to take a shot at reading this?
Well,
Okay, Chris, thanks.
I'm having trouble with my eyes, so you guys be patient with me. Okay, now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." "You will not certainly die," the serpent said to the woman, "for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves.
Okay, so let's just pause. When you look at this passage here, is there anything that you notice when you just read the words, close reading, absent from what you think should be there?
Well, nobody's going to hell.
No discussion of hell or repercussions other than, what happens when you eat it. What else?
Well, I thought that the fruit was an apple. There's no mention of that.
No mention of the apple.
Sorry, my internet keeps falling off.
That's okay. Anything you notice that is missing that from what you think should be there? Go ahead, Marie.
Eve didn't say to Adam, "Come on, eat some." They just both ate it. He was there, it says.
He was there. Yeah, so he heard the serpent too. She grabbed it, took a bite, and gave some, and he was there and he ate it.
Didn't say he grabbed it. He just says he ate it.
You're right. Close reading. Well done, Bernie. He ate it.
She gave her some to her husband. And he
Yep.
ate it.
Yep. Any mention of the devil or evil?
No, just they
No.
will die.
Yep.
And that the serpent was craftier
Yeah.
than most.
Craftier
Well, it
than.
does say that you'll be like God, knowing good and evil.
Yep.
You will know good and evil.
Yep.
And you will be like God.
Yep. That's the repercussion. Anything about what happened after they ate it?
They realized they were naked and they made themselves some clothes, an apron, according to my old Bible.
Okay, so they realized they were naked and they made some clothes. I want you to we'll watch this one very closely. Because we're going to talk about what's read into the lines there.
Well, they didn't die.
No? Okay, so let's talk about this. So the text never says that the serpent of evil. That understanding comes from Christian theology, not from close reading. And the connections with the serpent becoming Satan comes from Christian theologians as early as the 2nd century. And it comes from theologians who are wrestling with why there's evil in the world and trying to understand the role of Jesus. This passage is going to evolve into atonement theology, or it's understood as the fall. This is the fall, is why Christ will have to be crucified, is this passage right here. This will all comes out of this passage. So once they realize they're naked, they clothe themselves. Augustine, our friend Augustine, is going to read into those words and say, connect it with sex, actually. And he's going to write extensively that Adam was aroused in that moment. And it is that arousal and that sex act as to why they were expelled from the garden. Augustine is going to take this and it's going to use it to develop the understanding of original sin, which is this assertion that in humanity, in Adam, in that first arousal, everybody is in sin because Adam's sin is in all humanity. This is what Augustine is going to develop around the year 400. This is going to be affirmed by the Council of Trent. So this will become official church doctrine and teaching. And then it is going to be picked up by Calvin in the Reformation. And Calvin is really going to run with it. So it really becomes a cornerstone of Protestant theology. This will connect sin and sex, and it will lead to all of the teachings through the centuries that view sex as a sinful act, even within marriage. Any sex that is not about procreation is all going to come from here and from this theology. And it also kind of affirmed these pretty dangerous misunderstandings of women as the primary seducers. So this thinking that Eve led Adam down this path. So that's what comes from what's been read between the lines of that passage. Go ahead, Paul.
So they didn't die, that's true, but they do die eventually. And up until that point, there was no understanding or discussion that people would die. And my question of last week, the tree of life, when you get farther into this, it explains that apparently if they ate of the tree of life, they would live forever.
That is not, if we went back and did some close reading on that, that's not there.
Well, we're going to get to that section in this. So
Okay. Okay, so hold that and we're going to keep looking for it, Paul, okay?
okay.
Okay, so that's how Christians, that is the thinking that won the day in Christianity. But I want you to know that there was other thinking around the time that Augustine really won the war. And it was a monk by the name of Pelagius. And Pelagius was a British monk. Again, same time frame as Augustine. He's reading the same scriptures. He's going to come to a radically different understanding. He believed and taught that humankind was basically had a good moral nature, and that there should be a focus on individual responsibility for voluntarily choosing spiritual advancement. So it's really, the human condition is good, right? I'm sorry, that the human condition was responsible for this journey into seeking spiritual advancement and good. Pelagius believed that the soul was neither good nor evil, right? So he believed that all humanity came into being, same condition as was Adam before the fall. Each soul is created immediately by God and that cannot come into the world contaminated or corrupted by the sin of Adam. So Pelagius is going to break that connection that Augustine has made between sin and all of humanity. Pelagius is saying, no, God is going to create every soul individually. Pelagius said the doctrine of transmitted sin is blasphemous. So those are some pretty harsh words. He goes on to say a sin propagated by generation, again, that we all are evil because of Adam, is totally contrary to the Catholic faith. Sin is not born with man, but is committed afterwards by man. It is not the fault of nature, but of free will. So these words, teachings, preachings, made him an incredible foe of Augustine. Unfortunately, Pelagius was convicted of heresy and almost all of his writings have disappeared. But I think it's important to know that at the time that Augustine was reading the same scriptures, that there were other theologians out there reading the same scriptures and coming up with very, very different understandings. Okay, so I want to take us out of Christian understandings of those passages because they're pretty, I don't know if they can be redeemed. So instead, I want to offer you some understandings from our Jewish siblings. So I'm going to draw on Jewish theologians to kind of understand what might have been happening in here. First of all, in Judaism, they think of the serpent as the trickster. This is actually very similar to thinking of in Norse theology, like Loki, the trickster, that there's an archetype of the trickster, that the serpent is the trickster in the story. So it isn't the act of eating the fruit that's the sin, it's the idea of usurping or not listening to God's authority. The serpent never directly suggests eating the fruit, but instead uses questions to reinforce this desire that's already there. So again, in Judaism, the serpent is the trickster. So the opening of humanity's eye may lead to the expulsion, but in a way it also defines our humanity, our independence, and our free will. So again, a different way to think about the repercussions of that action. In Christianity, it's defined as the fall. It is the end of paradise. In Judaism, it is not understood that way. It is an opportunity to walk into independence and free will. Okay, also I want you to consider that within Judaism, again, this is a Hebrew story, right? That many Jewish theologians just consider this a story about Israel. That it's not a story about Adam and his family, but it's in miniature a story about Israel. Both Adam and Israel are created by God, both given a great plot of land to live in as long as they obey and trust God. And both Adam and Israel stories of owning that land are tied to obedience and trusting of God. So remember, this is not a Christian story. This is a Jewish story. So these are some of the ways Judaism understands that story, right? So take off your Augustine lenses. In Judaism and in early Christianity. Early Christianity understood this the same way Judaism does. It's not a story about the fall. It's a story about failing to grow to godly wisdom and maturity. That trusting in God is the prerequisite of knowing good and evil. And Adam and Eve used a shortcut. And true knowledge can only be gained by trusting, revering, and loving God. So think about everything we've been taught about this story and just kind of put it over there. Understand that early Christianity and Judaism, and it's a Jewish story, don't understand it that way. Okay. Okay. So what's the point then, particularly in Judaism, that the choices put before Adam and Eve are the same put before Israel and us every day? Learn to listen to God, follow God's way, and then you will have life. And God is always, always moving to bring us to paradise. That would be the Jewish understanding of this story. So let me just kind of stop there and check in with people, because this is a pretty big one to kind of unpack and leave behind what might not serve us. Any comments, questions, anything about this one?
Yeah, I have a question about Pegasus. I'm not sure what his name was. The theologian that disagreed with Augustine. You say
Pelagius.
Say it again, please.
Pelagius.
Pelagius. He was condemned. Why? Was
Yeah,
he condemned because he disagreed with?
Yeah. So in the 4th century, by that point in time, the church was the Church of Constantine. It was quite hierarchical, and it was working very hard to lock down its doctrines. And whereas in maybe the 1st or 2nd century, there was a lot of different ways to understand things, by the 3rd and 4th century, that was really disappearing quickly. Augustine was a bishop in Alexandria, a very powerful and influential bishop, wrote extensively, and was an incredibly good orator as well as writer. And at the end of the day, Augustine had more writing, more power, and his teachings won the day, and Pelagius lost.
crazy.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, ready to go back?
Yep.
Okay, let's go on then and do Genesis 3:8-13. Someone else want to read? Go ahead, Marie.
Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" He answered, "I heard you in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" And the man said, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it." Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate it."
Not a lot of accountability, a whole lot of blaming going on, huh? Okay, so let's talk about this one. So Adam blames the woman blames the serpent, and in the blaming, trust is broken. So a lot of feminist scholars point to this moment as the beginnings of male supremacy and patriarchy, that at this point in time, the trust between men and women are broken. God goes on to curse the serpent, Eve, and the man. And early Christianity, post-Augustine, is going to read these verses as an allusion to Satan's first cosmic belief. So how would the earliest original readers understand these passages? Again, this was written for captives in the Babylonian Empire, 500 years before Christ. So if we look to our Jewish theologian friends, here's what you would find. What was once a blessing is now a curse, and it is a metaphor to explain the origins of good and evil people and good and evil things. And it answers cosmic questions. Why is the earth at times the enemy of humans, like hurricanes and droughts? Why must humans work? Why must we die? And it's going to give us the oldest assessment of the human conditions. Humans will live a life of hard labor and die, returning to the soil from whence they came. So I I didn't include that part to read it, but that's the section that goes on behind here to say what happens when they are out. So it gives us the oldest assessment. So if you put on the lenses of the earliest readers, it's going to answer questions like, why do things suck? And what is the human condition? Hard labor and die, which really did speak to the human condition at the time of the original readers. Okay, let's gonna go on because I want to talk about, I want to get into the kids. So Genesis 3:20 to 24. Somebody like to read that one? Go ahead, Chris.
Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all the living. The Lord God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them. And the Lord God said, "The man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever." So the Lord God banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he had been taken. After he drove the man out, he placed on the east side the Garden of Eden cherubim and a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life.
Okay,
That was what I was referring to about the tree of life.
there you go. So I think this is the last reference to the tree of life. Okay. Okay, so this is the expulsion from paradise. They become basically the first refugees. And I want you to again remember who is the original reader. So the original reader are those exiled Babylonian captives forced from their land, asking big questions like, where is our God? And then that question is going to become, how do we get back? So think about the original audience and the context of them asking that question. And how do you get back to paradise? This is a story that would deeply resonate with them. Jesus is going to answer that entry in the kingdom is not based on doctrine, but based on what we do or fail to do to the least of these. So in Jesus's teaching, 500 years after this is written, he's going to talk about actions being what leads us back to paradise. And a nice way to think about it is nobody gets back into paradise without a letter of recommendation from the poor and marginalized among us. That's going to be Jesus's teaching. Okay, that leaves behind Genesis 3, the story of Adam and Eve. At the end of 3, they're out of paradise, and paradise is being blocked by that angel in the flaming sword, where the tree of life is there. And for those of you that did the Revelations class, you'll see that imagery showing up in Revelations. The author, John of Revelations, is going to include some of that imagery.
Marci,
Yeah.
again, in the King James Version, only he is kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Therefore, the Lord sent him forth from the Garden of Eden.
You know what? I'm reading the NSRV, and I agree. You're absolutely right, Bernie. There's no mention of him, of her.
So
Other
see,
than, other than the beginning of 4, she's with him.
all of you women, you know, you
We're
live
still in paradise.
Absolutely.
Good catch, Bernie. That's some close reading. Good job. Okay, Genesis 4. Let's talk about the kids. I'll go ahead and read this. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now, Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" Okay, so Eve creates new life. She gives birth to two sons, and both are going to grow and thrive and begin to harvest, and they bring offerings to God. Cain brings offerings from the land, Abel from the livestock. Now, we don't know why God rejects Cain's offering. It probably speaks to the earliest audience's lack of understanding or confusion as to why bad things happen. You attribute it to God, right? The Jewish reading of the text is that Abel offers with a sincere and contrite heart, and Cain offers his without. And again, this is from Jewish tradition. This is not in the text. It is a Jewish understanding of the text, why God would reject one. It is the first mention of sin in the Bible. So we are 4 chapters into Genesis. It is the first time that sin is mentioned. So God believes Cain can enter into right relationship with God and his brother, but instead Cain's allowing sinful impulses and desires to rule. There's no Satan to blame here. Cain is choosing his path willingly. So be real cautious about the Cain and Abel tale. There is no Satan. There is no serpent. It is Cain operating with his own free will. So Cain is going to murder Abel. And God is going to come looking for Abel and asks Cain where Abel is. And humanity is going to ask the first big ethical question in the scriptures. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? And this is a question that will come up repeatedly in Jesus's ministry, in Jewish practice and thought and doctrine. Am I my brother's keeper? The first big ethical question. So again, Jesus is going to broaden it to say, who is my brother? If you think about the tale of the Good Samaritan, who is my brother? Who is my neighbor? Okay, so if we think about this, though, and we take off our Christian lenses and look at it through potentially the gift of Jewish theologians, and understand that maybe this is Israel's story, what would be the point? Be wise, follow God's commands, and you get life, or be foolish and reject God's commands and you get death. Failure to follow wisdom has lethal consequences, not just privately, but socially. That's how that story is understood if this is a tale of Israel and not two brothers. So let me just stop right there and just do a check-in on Cain and Abel. That's a pretty iconic story. Questions, thoughts, reactions on that one?
Well, is there a lot written about why God accepted one offering and not the other?
None.
That's really puzzling.
It is. So then I always go back to what was the original audience struggling with, and why would it have been a question to matter to them? Yeah, there's no clue as to why God did one or the other. Which is why Jewish practice is something called midrash, which is kind of filling in the holes in the Bible. And this is one of many, many big holes where we don't know the motives, we don't know the backstory. All we know is a few sentences, right? And so in Jewish midrash, the Jewish rabbis would come up with creative stories or backstories that would help explain that and argue them and articulate them and write them. And Christianity hasn't done the best job of that, but these are Jewish stories, and there is Jewish midrash to dive into those answers.
Are we supposed to believe that Cain and Abel are the first babies that were ever born?
Only if you believe the story is factually and literally true. And I think we know it's an ancient story. It probably predates its writing by centuries. So it was written down around the 5th century BCE, and it was an oral tradition that was passed on before there. And we know that people told stories to help them understand the human condition and why bad things happen and why good things happen. Go ahead, Marie.
It seems like it's unfair to Cain, but God does keep talking about him. He isn't written off immediately. God says, well, now if you do this, why don't be downhearted. Look at it this way. So he does keep talking to him. And then it becomes the same problem as his parents. He doesn't follow the rules.
Yeah. So again, you've heard me say this like thousands of times, context shapes context. So we look at this story within 21st century eyes, within all of the teachings that we've had over the decades, within a Christian understanding. And the context is these are just ancient myth stories in Genesis, written 2,500 years ago, intended to capture oral tradition that had been going on for centuries before it, answering the big questions about, who we are, why do bad things happen, all of that. Okay, let's go on then. Genesis 4:10. The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crop for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, "God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him." Seth also had a son, and he named him Enosh. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. So this is how the story of Adam and Eve is going to end. And after this, we're going to go on to the descendants in the next chapter of Adam and Eve. So this passage actually is going to do a lot of harm throughout time. So let's talk about this. So God's going to respond by cursing Cain, who cries out for mercy, and God listens and places a mark on him, so he'll be protected. This text is going to become the religious foundation for slavery and white supremacy. So white supremacists are going to read that text and assume that Adam and Eve and God were all white. This is formal white supremacy teaching. Cain's mark is associated with blackness, and Black people are descendants of Cain's line, and they become the children of sin and murder. So Cain's mark comes to mean that servitude was the consequence of Cain being black, hence justifying slavery. That one passage up there about the Lord putting the mark on Cain is going to become the justification for slavery in the United States. It's going to be quoted by pastors for centuries to justify slavery. And it to this day continues to be cited as the scriptural passage to justify white supremacy teachings. So the chapter concludes with Eve giving birth again to Seth. And then with that birth comes the hope for renewal and restoration. So life is going to continue on with Seth and Seth's descendants. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and just do a kind of a check-in. We're probably going to end a little early today because I'm not going to send you into small groups because we have so few people today. But just do a check-in, anything, observations on what you're learning about Genesis, anything you're leaving behind. Go ahead, Chris.
Where are the women born?
Well, again, you're reading it as a literal story, right? And we know it's a myth. And so, yeah. Now, what I'd be very curious about, and this is probably worth doing some research on, is how do creationists answer that question? I do not know the answer. For those who are literalists that read this as a factual history of the earth, I don't know the answer to that one, but it kind of intrigues me. I might do some research on that this week. Go ahead, Paul.
So this last bit, it kind of boggles my mind how the white supremacists can read that. I mean, it's an incredible stretch to me that when it puts a mark on somebody, that means they're black.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not, I mean, I thought like a birthmark or something, but anyway, but the reason he does it is so they will be protected. So how they twist that around to get that means they should be slaves.
No.
I just can't see it.
Yeah. I think it's the case with many ways that biblical passage are used to justify hate and oppression is you can look for what you want and you can make it fit.
I think also to Chris's question about where the women, this is a patriarchal society, the women are only there to create the children, and where they came from is irrelevant, I think.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. Go ahead, Bernie.
Again, we're talking King James, but
Yep.
Fourth chapter in 23rd paragraph, 22nd paragraph, it says that, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Nama.
Yes.
So there is a mention of a female, assuming the sister is female.
And that's coming out of Cain's line.
Yes.
Yep. So when Cain leaves, and we didn't go over this one on 4:17, Cain knew his wife and she conceived and bore Enoch, and he built a city and named it after his son. And then it goes through the descendants of Cain.
Right.
And there's lots of women who pop up then.
Yeah.
Okay. Where they come from, we don't know.
It's magic.
But one of them was a sister.
Yep.
Well, he doesn't say he created male and female donkeys or, cows or sheep either. It just it's a species. It doesn't really go into how in the world they carry on,
Yeah.
I don't know what I said he, but as the reader, as a writer, I think, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah. Okay, so next week we're gonna do 5 and 7. That's the story of Noah. We're gonna really have to suspend any sort of literal thinking on this one. This one, just read it as a good fairy tale. This one's kind of interesting, but I'll also bring in some of the pieces from the museum in Tennessee that has the replica of the ark. So,
Really?
oh yeah, it's big business. I'll show you some of the pictures.
Marci, another thing, a
Yep.
lot of this Adam and Eve and particularly the flood and so forth, that's also in other religions besides Judaism and Christianity, is it not?
Yes, yes. We're going to talk about that next week, that
Okay.
the flood stories are actually pretty prevalent in ancient societies. Myth or flood myth.
They have a flood story in the Northwest Indian tradition also.
Yeah.
A brother and sister get into a canoe
Yeah.
to survive the flood.
Which makes total sense when you think about the catastrophes of flooding, and yet how ancient civilizations were forced to build around water. So dependent on it and beholden to it, and yet utterly destroyed. Makes sense. There would be a lot of flood myths.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody, then I wish you a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank
Well,
you.
you
Same to
too.
Thank you.
Take care,
Thank you, Marci.
everyone. I'll see you
Bye
next
all.
week. Okay.
Okay,
bye.
bye.